Okay, welcome everybody. This is CICMQ Zoom number, I'm not quite sure, but we've got an awful lot, we've done an awful lot of these now. We're up to 700 plus delegates, so thanks everybody for joining. Today's session is going to be about careers in this new way of working that we're in at the moment, and I'm very, very pleased to say that we have Karen Young from Hayes Recruitment with her colleagues Natasha, Tony and Kabir, also from Hayes, the senior leadership team, I guess, from credit recruiting in Hayes. And we're really, really pleased that that they're able to come on the call. We have a good selection of credit managers from lots of different industries online. I would just like to say thanks very much for joining, Karen. It's a pleasure as always to see you. I am going to share my screen now so that we can pull up the presentation for Karen. Here we go. And share. The session is due to last somewhere in the region of about an hour or thereabouts. However, if there's questions and stuff carrying on, we'll carry on and keep the call open. As I said, if anybody wants to ask questions, they can either do it privately to me on the message box at the bottom there, or alternatively, you can send me an email to CICMQ at cicm.com shortly after this presentation or during it. It's up to you. I've got my emails open there as well, so I can ask questions if you don't want to do it on this platform. Okay, so I would, without any further ado, I'd very much welcome Karen. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Karen. It's a pleasure as always. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Chris. And just to confirm, you're driving the slides for me, I believe.
I am driving the slides.
Excellent. There's quite.
It's the most driving I've done actually since lockdown.
Yeah, I've done very, very little too. So thank you very much for inviting me today. And the first thing I'm going to start with is that you might be not that pleased to hear this, but I don't have all the answers. But the plan is that I'm going to share with you a little bit about what's been happening within the market. Chris, actually, if you could move on to the next slide, that would be great. Just in terms of what's coming today. So kind of emerging trends in careers and recruitment and the recruitment market in general. So I've got some data that looks at what we saw in 2019, what we saw sort of January, February, March, and then what's been happening in April and May, just to put some context behind it. A couple of case studies of recruitment that have been hired through remote recruitment process, just to kind of put a bit of context behind the story. And a few top tips of how to hire or manage your own job application through a remote process. Mine will be pretty kind of quick fire tips, but at the end, there are a number of references to lots of fantastic information and guides that we've now got hosted on hayes.co.uk. Plus, we're going to be doing a Q&A live session at the end with Kabir, Natasha and Tony. So they may well then chip in and you might have more questions and more specific questions about that. And then this is the bit where it's kind of crystal ball time in terms of, what might recruitment and job search look like in the new world, and how will our careers be structured? And that's where I don't want to be held to account for what I say is my opinion in about 3 or 5 years. But it would be interesting to look back to this recording actually at that point and see how things have gone. And as I said, I can make available via Chris the slide deck, and there's the practical toolkit at the end. Great. So on to emerging trends. So kind of what has been happening. The first data I'm going to look at, if we move to the next slide, please, Chris, is actually the job registrations in credit and receivables at Hayes, so our own operational internal data, and looking at the permanent market to start with. So are there any trends here? Well, interestingly, if we look at our full year 2019, you can see the top 5 most commonly registered and recruited for job titles in credit and receivables. Then you can see it for January to March, as I mentioned, and then you can see it over April and May. So first observation would probably be that we always recruit a lot of credit controllers. It's remained in #1 slot as the most frequently registered job. Not too much has changed, but I've just sort of red boxed a couple of things like collections officer and the National Commercial Recoveries Executive coming through into that top 5. Largely that is down to a couple of organisations that have done quite considerable multiple recruitment in credit, which is how that's made the top 5 through some new setups. And credit manager, unfortunately, bearing in mind our audience on this call, does move down the top 5. But it's still in the top 5. I'm not entirely unexpectedly seeing that, because this kind of happened in 2009. And let's face it, most organisations and management and leadership teams are kind of surviving or have been surviving and are really only recently trying to get heads up from heads down and start to look at planning and process. And I just give you a bit of comfort in that the same thing has happened with our senior finance qualified accountancy appointments business. We've been recruiting lots of management accountants, but less so on the controller and directorship roles. It will come back. Credit manager will not remain there in fourth position, I'm sure of it. But that's just a bit of context on the background to it. So what does temp look like if we just move on? There's not perhaps so much here. Again, we see credit controller as number one, various variations in terms of job title, the collections officer piece there. So I'd say on temp, it's kind of business as usual in terms of people that can come in and do a job and work operationally within teams. And then what about sector on the next slide? Kind of anything interesting there? Actually, in credit, you're not seeing as much change as we see across the broader business. Manufacturing always plays a part in the top 5. You can see FMCG, you can see charities there, interestingly, and they've been fairly common throughout the last, nearly 18 months. But interestingly, advertising over April and May has gone into the top slot. Financial services, driven a lot by one particular business doing a lot of recruitment. But certainly in manufacturing, it's been a consistent sector for us at Hays, recruiting finance professionals overall. Most up to date have been more accounts assistant and accounts payable. I'd say that's been a trend there. What we expect to see as certainly manufacturing and construction have come back to work in inverted commas a little bit more normally, I do expect credit and receivables, whilst it has been a little quieter than any of us might like, I think that it is on the cusp of change, and we saw this happen in 2009. And certainly for me, when I look at my business lines, if you like, to put it into context, because at the end of the day, we have recruitment business lines. I've firmly articulated to the UK board at Hays that credit will be a busier sector, but we do need a bit more kind of BAU. But it's certainly going to come, I think, over the next 12 weeks. So you can hold me to account on whether that happens or not. So if we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to reference some external data. It's a company that we procure data from in the recruitment industry. And this just sort of backs up to a certain extent, and there are some differences as well, interestingly. So credit controller, this is 2019 for the full calendar year. You can see credit controller, most frequently advertised job again. You can see credit manager in there as well, and a whole variation of job titles. Interestingly, ignore the location for now. London's always going to look dominant. It's a sort of bit harsh to then compare it even with Manchester next. There's still considerable recruitment that happens in those locations. But by sector, retail was busy during 2019. Software and tech, you'd expect law, real estate, media, etc. Charities we talked about. Food producers is our FMCG. Construction and materials you can see there as well. So that's what it looked like for 2019. If we flick to the next slide for 2020, credit controller still up there at the top in terms of the most frequently advertised job. In this external data, don't panic. Credit manager does fall out of that, but it will be back. And ultimately, as we've said, businesses are surviving. There haven't been as many changes at management and leadership level, unless it's been a kind of forced change. So I do expect to see that return. But here, law comes up to the top. This is January through to May. You've got telecoms, you've got the software and tech, the real estate there. Retail's dropped right back, as you can see, to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th place there. And then you've got things like healthcare services, medical devices, pharma, absolutely what you'd expect, probably through your reading of the press and listening to news around.
Why is it, do you think law is at the top, Karen? Is it a blip with one particular client, or?
A couple of, and it does tend to be it's been the bigger firms, but we've just seen that's kind of multiple locations. But it's I hate to say it, but I think these are large companies who are advertising vacancies on their own websites, and so it's not Hays data. There is a little bit of element of what we would call organisations looking at their pipeline for talent. I'm not saying that they wouldn't recruit if someone applied, but it's very different to a qualified job at Hays, where we have determined, is this client actually ready to recruit before we advertise a job vacancy. Some people are doing that because they do anticipate their needs, but there's often a time lag between then people applying to those jobs and actually getting interviews on them.
One of the things that was interesting, I was talking to a software provider the other day, and they said that they're getting more requests for collection software from law firms than from any other organisation.
Right.
Which makes you think, well, they're either getting better at collecting their own money or they're offering collection services. And I think they're offering collection services,
yeah.
which is why we've got an increase in credit controllers joining that marketplace potentially.
Yeah,
and I've got a call with them again this afternoon to talk about this, because this is quite an interesting
jump in as well.
Sorry, say again, Kabir?
I was going to say, if I could just jump in quickly as well, in London, it's a skill set thing for legal as well, where lawyers who have a strong litigation department, so there's a big focus on them looking into the future, and definitely what you just said, Chris, as well, with regards to collection teams for collection software, and that is probably also the reason why you're seeing a lot within not just law but the tech and the software industries now, because we kind of now there's an increase in demand in those industries because we kind of get accelerated into the digital and remote world. So you'll see in the next quarter where people are working more remotely, there's much more of a digital way of working. You'll see those industries continue to increase.
Okay, yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? I'm going to have another chat with the software company today to find out what the trends are. So it is interesting. I think that given the marketplace, given the economy, given the debtors positions that everybody's going to be in, there's an awful lot of people thinking, right, we can make some money here. Let's set up our own little debt collection agency on the back of our law firm and see what we can pick up from our clients. And I think that that's certainly something that they're thinking of. Sorry, Karen, I'll shut up.
No, it's good. No, it's good to have this as we go along. I mean, it's interesting as well. The board asked me a lot about credit recruitment when I was presenting a couple of weeks ago at the board meeting, and they're kind of going, well, why isn't insolvency going mad? It should be going mad. I'm like, not yet.
No, exactly.
What would be the point in that if you haven't managed to procure some sort of deal for the organisation?
Yeah.
So it's just that it's frustrating for people in a way if you're looking to further your career at the moment and make a move in credit management and insolvency, but ultimately it will come. We know that
it will. I mean, as soon as the government's various funds and grants and loans and stuff starts to disappear, furlough stops, then the insolvency thing is going to kick in big time, and it's going to be 2 to 3 months, I reckon, and it's going to really start to kick in. We saw Preps yesterday or day before yesterday talking about delaying landlord stuff and trying to delay their rent. So it's definitely coming. I think organisations are hopefully trying to anticipate that. So okay.
I mean, and the charities bit is interesting because it comes up in all sorts of sets of data, and you kind of think they're having the hardest time as charities in terms of obviously getting their funds in, but ultimately then that does play to the fact if you've got someone that can help obviously control that situation. I was reading about Chester Zoo just last night, and whether or not you agree with zoos, it is a charity zoo that does put their funds back in for conservation and to prevent sort of extinction of animal groups, and they're losing 1.6 million a month with not having people coming through the gates. They reckon they'll be in debt by 24 million by the end of 2020. So it's a really interesting.
There was a question raised by somebody, Nottingham. That's kind of jumped up there. What's happening in Nottingham? Is it Experian have suddenly thought, oh, we need to collect some money, or what is it?
I can't remember the exact client, but there's 2 or 3 that pushes Nottingham up, and that's the difference on this data because it's large businesses. So if even there, then we'll do. The final bit I'd say just on this data is at a rough estimate at the moment during COVID, sort of job flow is probably about 35% of what it was pre-COVID. That's being really candid with you. There's no point in being anything else.
Yeah.
But at 35%, it's not that the market is completely frozen. There is recruitment happening, and I'll show that to you in a moment. So it has been impacted. Of course it has, especially when you've got people in your team on furlough or you're on furlough yourself. But it is returning and it is improving every single week. So I just want to be really honest about that, but also the fact that we are seeing an improvement. So from 4 weeks ago, it's better. From 2 weeks ago, it's better. And like we say, credit should come back. Okay, and then I'm just going to quickly look at the next couple of slides, because some of you will have seen these before, but the DNA of a kind of credit professional, it's certainly not every soft skill or competency, but I just wanted to kind of just get you thinking about this again. So some of the competencies that might be needed if you're a good credit professional in white, the blue might be needed if you're going into management and leadership. And then if we click to the next slide, it's the green that's the interesting stuff. So social dynamics, digital literacy, cognitive, critical thinking, interpersonal judgment, creativity. It's a bit poor in green, isn't it? Sorry about that. And these were things that kind of over the last couple of years we've been saying, these are starting to creep through the job and person specifications. You need to be thinking about that and thinking about if you're going to an interview that you might be asked a competency-based question around creativity, for example, and don't freeze like a rabbit in headlights. Be prepared for it. And now, we're thrown into this, the social dynamics element of the fact that many people are working remotely and digitally, more so than ever before. I mean, the change that's happened in our own business at Hayes over 11 weeks, I reckon it would have taken us 2 years at least, probably, to be kind of doing what we're doing now. And we managed to achieve it within a matter of about 3 weeks.
Yeah, remote working is still new to 90% of the credit managers.
Yeah.
And it is, and some credit managers, to be honest, are still struggling with it. Some of them really embraced it. Others are struggling with it. And it's an interesting one. Yeah.
It is. And it's the same in recruitment, Chris. Some people are embracing it and loving it. Some people are finding it really hard, because if you think about, you're in that similar environment where you're normally with obviously a team around you celebrating success.
Yeah. But with some really good training, Tony could get a lot better. Sorry, Tony, couldn't resist it, my friend. Okay.
So the digital literacy, that was kind of maybe a bit optional before. It's now essential. It's part of the job. The creativity bit. How do we put innovative solutions and problem solving in place to get through this crisis? So if you are going to be interviewing and looking at your career, be ready and think about these things. Tell me about a time when you've had to be creative in your role to solve a problem. You really need to be ready for it, rather than thinking, oh my goodness, why are we talking about creative credit or creative accounting? So I just wanted to kind of pause on that.
One thing that Tony mentioned on a call yesterday actually was that he's now completed, and I think you're probably going to cover this, he's completed recruitment from the absolute point of the actual job being advertised all the way through. Right the way to the very end now, and this is now becoming a much more normal way of doing it, which is. It
is absolutely, yeah. Right, so on that note, that segues nicely in, Chris.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Here we go. So few case studies. So if you click straight onto the next one, this is just a selection of some of the credit and receivable jobs that have been hired by us at Hayes, over these last 11 weeks, really. And as you can see, they kind of echo the summary of data we've already looked at. Credit controller there quite frequently. There's a couple of credit management roles in there that have been hired. And you can see obviously a rough range in terms of the salary. So some of you might have come on thinking, well, is there much recruitment happening? No, nothing, or a little bit. This is just to hopefully give you some peace of mind that things are still happening. These are permanent jobs that have been hired during COVID. Some of them registered probably more towards the end of February. Some of them started the process maybe with a face-to-face first round of interviews, but have certainly concluded with video interviews for second, online assessments, offers done remotely, documentation sent through remotely, PC or laptop arrived with a courier, online setup, etc., which I'll come on to actually on a couple of examples in a moment. So that's just a bit of a headline. So just to talk about a couple, I've literally picked these fairly at random. So if we click onto the case study one. So a services organisation, I've deliberately kept it fairly vague, but somewhere in the south. Over the recent times, they've centralised their credit function from all sorts of different sites across both southern and northern Europe into one location in the UK. So there's been an ongoing need developing for language speakers in the credit and collections team. There has been some internal deployment, but internal deployment for the redeployment for the credit controller positions has been a little bit tougher because people haven't necessarily been prepared to relocate for that. So obviously a need for some external hires, and in particular German and Spanish speaking. And this instance, the line manager said, we really want CV sorted 24 hours, which is what we'd normally hope to deliver to anyway. and a Spanish-speaking professional for a credit controller role. And actually the line manager said, you know what, I don't necessarily need someone who's a seasoned credit controller. I need the Spanish, I need fluent Spanish skills. So I will take the language skill over the technical credit skills. And I know Bryony Pettifor and I have had this conversation before about her recruitment pieces in Sheffield for an exit. Key requirement, business intelligence, business nous, business acumen, and just good numeracy skills. So we saw CVs, shortlist of 3 CVs. First interviews did take place in early March. Offer was made just before lockdown. But then the interesting bit is all of the onboarding and joining documentation was done digitally. The signature on that was done digitally. The PC setup, the systems training, all of that delivered to the person's home. Quite common now is obviously meet the team Zoom sessions. So if you are going to recruit over these next few months, joining the session next week with Chris on how to do Zoom well is really important. And then they've moved obviously to Teams, and the person started their new job from their living or dining room working remotely. And what's really interesting is actually, with the checks that we've done, initial training's been completed, and the person has now got a set of customer accounts. Obviously the language skills are there, really excited about the future, because the news that we had just yesterday was they're about to obviously start to put that person through CICM training and qualifications. So someone that didn't come from a credit background, credit piece of recruitment, but really exciting. And I just read actually a note that the candidate had sent to the recruiter just this morning. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that they'd put, it was really difficult to start with, but the organisation couldn't have done more to support me. Video calls on training, video calls for regular catch-ups to check in with me. And I, that it had been a really kind of quite difficult that first week or two. And I do think we need to acknowledge that, but that they felt supported. It didn't all go, completely perfectly, but things were resolved pretty quickly. And their point was that within a couple of weeks, they felt they were able to be working, fairly independently and starting to look after their own customer accounts. So I think that's interesting. And then the second one, fairly similar, but to technology organisation or the UK HQ, accounts receivable manager, and you can read that. Obviously, I can circulate the slide deck afterwards, but this was all done remotely. The briefing call, most importantly, between the Hays consultant and HR to get an understanding. We'd normally be walking through the doors of your organisation to get a feel for culture, etc., and the fit. Obviously, all of the CVs sent across, and then first stage interviews, which were done on Microsoft Teams in this instance, and we did some technology test runs. So again, if you kind of, oh gosh, how am I going to do this if I go for an interview? If you're working with a Hays consultant, and we can help with things like technology test runs, and then we had further virtual meetings to obviously review feedback on the CVs. Successful offer of employment, and this person's due to start on the 22nd of June. They are hoping it will be a socially distanced start in the office. It'll certainly be an induction, but obviously things can change between now and the 22nd of June. So if they need to start remotely, then that's what they will be doing. So what have we learned then through this? Because we've learned we've learned a lot, and I'm just going to sort of pause briefly on these just in the interest of time, because I do want us to get to kind of some good Q&A, given that this was quite a popular session. So just onto the next. On the next slide, just some tips really. So, if you're going, and I'm sure Natasha and Tony and Kabir may chip in on this, but if you're going to go for an interview, it's really important just to not get too stressed out about it. That everything that the interview is there to do, you to find out more about the role and whether you think you like it, and if you think you can work there, and if your skills are suitable, and for the interviewer to get to know a little bit about you. Understand your skills and decide whether they think you can do the job and are going to fit in there. All of that is the same. It's only the how that has changed. That's all it is. So everything else, and actually all you need to do is apply kind of all the stuff that you would normally do. If you would normally go and do a bit of a drive to see that you know exactly where the location is, and suss out so you know where you're going for your interview, well, then you find out what technology it's going to be on, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp. People are using lots of different things, and you do the test run with your Hays consultant and test it out. And I suppose the only other tip I'm finding is, and I'm still definitely not perfect at this, but it's being really mindful of where your camera is on the device that you're using. So on my laptop, it's right at the top along that section. But I found when I'm in meetings, my eyes are drawn to look at the people, of course, on the screen. I'm looking at Chris now, but he's over there. So do I look like I'm making eye contact with you as a group? Probably not right now. So you have to there's a bit of a knack to kind of looking at the screen and making eye contact, which you would really want in an interview, and also trying to watch and judge a little bit of the body language from the people that are on the screen in front of you. So it's just testing that out with a family member, a friend, case consultant, Chris and Sharon. It's and it only takes a few minutes to go, do I look like I'm looking at you? No, you don't. Like, look up a little bit and give you a bit of an adjustment on it. And then we've got loads of guides on this. You can see on the little thumbnail on the right hand side there, 10 steps to success for job hunting from home. I'll reference those guides just at the end. And maybe if we kind of leave Kabir and Natasha and Tony's comments to sort of a live session in a moment, because they'll probably add some of the tips in from what they've been doing over these last couple of months. And then the next one is more if you're going to actually be an employer interviewing on the next slide. And it's very similar actually in terms of advice. It's making sure you choose your type of how you're going to do the interview, and make sure it's technology you're familiar with. You're the driver in the interview, so if you can't make the technology work, it's not going to look very good. But making sure that you get what you're using across to via the recruiter to the candidate as soon as possible, so they can do what I've just advised you to do and get kind of familiar with it. And then my most important tip on that, or two tips, is it can be harder to remember people if you're not sat in front of someone. So making sure you've got get really organised, you've got your questions prepared you're going to ask, you've got appropriate things to be able to take some notes. And at the start of the interview, if you're the only person doing the interview, that you reference, say, I'm going to need to take some notes as we go. So if I'm looking down like this, it's because I'm just making a couple of notes to myself. That's really important. Otherwise, people will think, oh my goodness, they're not interested in what I'm saying. And then the other bit would be, normally people will make a view and form a judgment when they walk through the doors of your organisation, into your lobby, into your office, into the interview room, the people around them, how reception respond when you walk through. Immediately we form judgments on what it's like to work in that organisation. Now they're not walking through the door of your organisation, but you are the door to the organisation. So you're going to have to prepare and work harder than you probably would have ever done before when you've been interviewing people face to face, to tell them about that story and articulate what it's like to work there, and your mission statement and your values, and just talk to them a little bit and sell the story, because you're the only person that's going to create the picture of that. They're not going to physically get that picture.
Yeah,
okay.
That's a good point. I've got a very quick question. Do you believe that there's going to be more requirements for apprentices going forward based on the jobs coming through?
Oh gosh, to be fair, Hayes, we don't do a lot of apprenticeship recruitment, so it's quite difficult for us to judge that, mainly because people they're prepared to pay for professionally skilled, but generally will source direct on the apprenticeship piece. I don't know. I think it could go that way, but on the other hand, if we are in a situation, and I stress the if, where there are some redundancies in the market, then I think that some organisations will try and snap up the people that are already skilled in certain areas, but it depends on what budget they've got. So I think that's something I'll note that down, Chris, and I'll note it down.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks very much. And just to reiterate to everybody, if you want copies of this presentation when we're done, I'll also copy the links into the email as well. Send it to CICMQ@cicm.com. Okay, sorry, Karen.
Right. And then I'm just going to take you through, we've just launched a couple of brand new reports. One is a market insight report, which 16,000 professionals completed for us during May. And if people remember our What Workers Want series, it's a slightly revised version of that this year to be appropriate to what we feel people who are looking at their career choices and employers might need. And there's also a wellbeing report. So I'm not going to spend long on these slides because you can read them for yourself in the slide deck. But if we just click to the headlines on the first one, which is what did employees have to say? The headline for me is that nearly 60% of those 16,000 people, of which several thousand were finance and many were credit, still 60% anticipating to move jobs in the next year, which is actually very similar to what came out of our salary guide last year in November. So that hasn't changed an awful lot. And you can see there that there's, as always, there's kind of the mixed feeling about whether people are positive or whether they feel that their prospects are good. and whether they feel that there's ability to progress their career. But I think there is some positive things in there. 11% more confident they can progress their career since the coronavirus outbreak, and the number saying more positive. But generally, it's a little bit more the other way, which is what we're saying from the group this morning. And then to the next one, around work-life balance and well-being. So this is interesting. There's lack of social interaction being the greatest challenge to well-being. Not a surprise. We probably all feel that. But generally, some people have enjoyed working from home greatly, or being at home, and have tried to put the positive spin on the experience. So I think there's some interesting things. But the most important bit on that side for me is that 77% of people feel their employer has a responsibility to support their well-being, and yet 54% say their employer has not given any support to their well-being. So if you've got a team of people, it's something to think really, really a lot about. And also, in this new era of work, if we're working remotely, what does that look like? You can't take them down the pub for a drink, to give them a bit of a boost. So how do you do that? And you do have to use those skills of thinking creatively and thinking about the social dynamics that I mentioned earlier. Then quick ones to the next one. If you just go past the header, so employer view. So again, interesting from here is that 27% are in business as usual phase. The majority of people I speak to are kind of head down surviving, with a few starting to just look up and think, right, what's the plan? How do I need to change the plan? And an interesting kind of sentiment there around economic recovery. Certainly in the Deloitte CFO quarterly survey, they're anticipating U-shaped rather than V-shaped recovery, but that they do expect that their organisations return to pre-pandemic levels by Q2 2021, which is a long way away, but it's less than a year, just, if you think about that. By the start of Q2, I always put the positive spin on things. And to get their organisations back to pre-pandemic level performance, where things for most people were going quite well before COVID, there's quite a lot of recruitment potentially to undertake, and there's quite a lot of transformation to take along the way. So some positive things there, I think. And then the next one is just about recruitment. So 18% of those 16,000 people, albeit not finance, still recruiting staff. More dominated at the moment from these last few weeks through perm, but some temp as well. Right, so the new era of work, Karen's crystal ball. I'm going to just sort of pose a couple of sort of thoughts here, because we might get some questions on this. So, will our organisations look the same again? No, I don't think they will. I don't think we know entirely what they're going to look like. But there was an article in the Financial Times recently around some people expressing a preference for digitalized service versus face-to-face. How technology will impact our people's strategies is really key, and the kind of working models. If we are in a situation where we anticipate we'll never have 100% of our workforce in the office at one time together again, the impact on that, and saying we only need 60 to 70% possibly of the capacity of our working space. How do we use the tools? How do we build and retain a successful culture in our organizations if what we anticipate happening happens, and that more people obviously do work remotely than ever before? So the coronavirus has accelerated this for us, but it was certainly coming. It's certainly been on conference agendas in credit and accounts payable and all sorts of places for at least the sort of last couple of years. And will everyone continue working from home? I think this is really interesting for credit, as it is for recruitment. I mean, we've proved we can. We've proved we can survive from that. But have we all got proof of concept we can do our jobs as well from home? In recruitment, can we create the sales? Can we help people's careers as well from home? I think we probably can, but there's not yet the proof of concept of it. So it's going to be how that develops. And there's some interesting things around. Everyone has been starting moving to all these great shared spaces and hot desks. I remember being at a CICMQ event 2 or 3 years ago where we heard from someone where they come in and they just pick what workstation they're going to use for the day, and all of that. That's now really difficult to do, isn't it? We're saying no shared spaces like that when you do return into your offices. So there's some challenges there. And then this piece around, will people travel further to work? So what would that be? I live on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales. If an organisation now said you only need to come to our work location once a week, 1 day a week, possibly 2, and that job location, that place of work was Southampton, just to pick somewhere a long way away, would I consider doing that job if I was working from home 3 days a week? Yeah, I probably would, because I'm used to staying away from home much more than that.
Yeah.
So if that truly happens and the place of work doesn't become as much a consideration, the impact on that for your career choices and for the talent pool for your organization is huge. It really is, because it becomes skill-based rather than location dependent. And there is risk and opportunity in that. There's far more opportunity for you in your own career, I believe, because the choice of jobs, as long as you're prepared to have some travel, if that's possible for you, becomes massive. And there's opportunity for you that if you are an organisation in Penrith that usually really struggles to get really specific credit skills, and now you can go, well, you only need to come here once, so I don't care if you live in Southampton. There's opportunity, but there's also massive risk, because it opens up the whole talent pool for anyone to kind of work anywhere. And therefore, there could be someone tapping up your experienced people and your talented people all of the time. So, we don't know what that's going to look like.
Someone said Tim Annis, who lives in Brighton, down in Brighton, said that he's looking forward to the price of his house going up, because people will want to live by the coast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why not?
Yeah, one of the daily CBI webinar yesterday, they were talking about that, kind of going, if that's the case, the expensive property piece, why would you wouldn't need to be there? So people, potentially will move out. It's huge. I don't have all the answers on this. And then just to close, then a few more sort of food for thought really on the next slide is, will we hire remotely more often? The question's been posed in our business. Will anyone ever do a face-to-face first round interview again, or will it all be video? Potentially. It saves you time. You can move straight away from one interview to the next. It can be very effective. So that will be interesting to see how it pans out. And the last bit on that is but despite all this, we know people have quite short memories. And if some organisations do return to work, we had a piece of accounts payable recruitment where we had 2 starters due to start on the 18th of May for a manufacturing business in Burnley. And they were due to start remotely. And then obviously the relaxation from the government came out about manufacturing construction being back to work. So in the end, those 2 people started in the office in a socially distanced environment in a kind of SME-sized manufacturing business. And so kind of immediately that organisation has said, you can have a bit of flexibility, sure, but ultimately, that is kind of already back to a bit more of what it would have been, pre-March.
And that's the demographic, isn't it, of the industry that you're in, and also the type of people that manage the business and what they want. Are they the command and control, or are they the more remote distance and remote managing type? And that's part of the challenge, I think. And I think what we mentioned before, Karen, was that people will want that level of flexibility. And if you don't offer that level of flexibility, people will find a job that does.
Of course, they will. And I think it's very easy to start to anticipate, okay, large businesses will work through this quite quickly and get it right, because if you've got a rotation scheme of some people in the office in a credit team and some people working from home, you've got more people to play with than if you are leading a team of 2 or 3 credit controllers in a medium-sized organisation. But for SMEs and medium-sized business to go back to how it was, it will be a big risk, because talent will make those different decisions to go where there's more flexibility. Because what is very obvious is the majority of people will want a greater element of remote working and agile working than they have before.
Yeah, as one of our sessions was there the other week, the genie is out of the bottle.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. So I think that's probably a good place to pause and see if there's questions from, and I'll just close with the useful links in a moment, but are there questions? Have we got questions coming in? So Kabir and Natasha and Tony can...
I'll just stop sharing for a moment. We can go back to the deck in a moment or two. Has anybody got any questions? You can raise a hand by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of the screen. Or anybody got any questions, or you can sort of write it in the chat box. Okay, just a question to everybody on there. If anybody wants to sort of raise this, what Karen has been saying, does this resonate with you? Do you feel that what she's saying is the right thing? Do you feel that this is the way that it's going to go in terms of the future?
Cashwell's nodding.
Athel's nodding, which is a good.
Yeah, definitely. No,
And Matthew,
yeah, yes, no, I think excellent presentation, Karen, and I think yes, it is. It's absolutely key, isn't it, that people have the flexibility. What clearly has come out during this COVID crisis, people have been tested. Those that have had to work at home, and those that have been fortunate enough to carry on going into the office, and I think whether you're young or old, it doesn't work for everyone to necessarily work at home or always work in an office. And it is that degree of flexibility, long as the work is getting done and the KPIs are being met. Those companies that are going to succeed are those that are flexible and actually are measuring. And I think you picked up, Karen, didn't you, when you mentioned about you haven't seen the proof of concept. How many companies have really got a handle on have they performed as well, say up to the end of March, as they have done to the start of June?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a question here that somebody raised. Do you see salary ranges dropping as a result of people working from home?
I just saw that come through. It's interesting because we're just starting to talk around how we run our salary guide process, which we normally launch in November, as you mentioned. Yeah. And I've been thinking about it a lot. And actually, I had some questions on a webinar I did last Thursday evening with CICMQ on this. And the questions was more kind of like, so if we're going to work from home, are our companies going to pay for us to have the best broadband? Are they going to pay for all our phone bills? Are they going to pay for this? They're going to pay for office chairs and desks to make sure, obviously, that we're sitting up in the right sort of equipment. I'm sure there's some bad backs coming out of these last few weeks where my dining room chair is okay, but it's not brilliant. And there was loads of questions around that, around what are the expectations of the organisation around your well-being and your financials if you're going to do that. I don't know about whether it will specifically drop because working from home, but it'll certainly change some things that organisations do and offer. And company car fleets and car allowances if you don't need to travel and you don't need the car. And even why would you give someone a car allowance? You just put extra onto the basic salary, right, if you're not going to travel. So the structure of things would look quite different.
Grants for season tickets.
Yeah, correct.
Et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's
London waiting, all sorts of things like that. And then I think the interesting thing and where I can see it flattening out is that if this happens and job location is a small consideration or many years in the future no longer a consideration. So I don't think this is all going to happen in 6 months, by the way. Then I can see the fact that why would you pay more or less in Penrith than Southampton? Potentially you would a little bit because of house prices and things, but I mean it's a huge question. It's a socio-economic question that I'm not equipped to answer, but I could see that there will be less differential in the future if remote working becomes more than 50% of your day-to-day working week.
Yeah. Karen, if I can jump in, I think like you said, we don't know what's going to happen, right? But what we're seeing in London, and what my personal opinion is that the way the package is structured may change because of, like you say, car bonuses, etc., like that, and work from home tech. But what we're seeing, you'll see an increase in registration with candidates because of the uncertainty in the market. So therefore, and what we're seeing and what we're speaking to our credit managers across London, what they'll be looking for is a very much more, they'll be looking for specialist skill sets from their staff. So if there's more candidates and they're looking for more of a specialist skill set, there's going to be competition for candidates. So I don't think there should be, in my opinion, what we're seeing, there shouldn't be that much of a change in salary because if there's there's an increase in competition for a particular skill set, for example, which we already see in legal. If you're a legal, Matthew, you'll know this, you worked in professional services before. You look for a particular skill set, right? And they're in, if they're in short supply, when there's something in short supply, the salary stays. So, I think, I don't know, but what we're seeing in London is from the conversations we're having, we don't think there'll be that much a change in salary.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Also, when you're talking about, you mentioned that the whole thing around people being more mobile in terms of living in Southampton, working in Penrith or wherever. If you're going to attract people, then you're going to have to dropping the salary down because you just happen to be in one part of the UK. It could be that salaries have to even out rather than change in terms of location.
I don't think that my personal opinion, not Hayes, is I don't think they will drop. I don't think we're looking at salary depression, but I think they will level out over a period of years, not months. Years. Yeah.
Hayes, what changes in employment contracts are you getting a feel for that are happening or have happened over the last 2 or 3 months, if any?
I haven't sort of been keeping a very close track on that on sort of an overview level. Generally, my response, be interested to see what the guys think, because they've been negotiating offers, is not a huge amount at all. But I do expect that they will change in light of some of the things we've just spoken about. But I've not seen a lot. Natasha, Tony, Kabir, have you got any? You may not have any insight into that particularly. Has anything changed?
No. I mean, placements of people that have started recently, they're all based from home. I don't think there's any wording in the contracts. Obviously, we see the contracts quite often when the candidate gets it. I've not seen anything that's changed. Obviously, people will return to the offices when they're required, but there's nothing in writing saying, to that degree.
Yeah, well, look at all of us. We've been working, I hope, nearly 3 months, and no one's changed our contracts.
We haven't got round to it.
Not yet, Karen.
We've got 5 minutes into this call.
You just put a note to self: change Kabir's contract. Is what she's done.
I think that's partly this, in survival, business as usual, head down, surviving through this. It's questions like that there will be change in employment contracts, but I think we haven't caught up with that yet, because there's still this kind of, we'll be all right because when we get back to the office, I won't need to change it. But that's probably not going to happen. I mean, some universities, councils, sort of anecdotally are saying, that they can't see things really returning to what they would call normal in terms of being in their offices. And they're sort of saying 12, 18 months away, some organisations, and some are still holding on to, some are still putting people back in on the 18th of May, right? So there's such a broad spectrum of it.
Yeah.
But again, that's something like the apprenticeship question. I think changes in employment contracts. Now the question's been asked. I'll keep much more of a close eye on that, and we can feed back in a few weeks if we see anything.
I think one of the things that was interesting was I did a webinar the other day. We had a few people on, and we asked the question: will things go back to normal? Would it just be back to normal again? 6% of the people online said it would just go back to the way that it was. So the expectation is that it's not going to.
How many, Chris? Sorry,
6%. So that they thought that it was going to be back to the way that it was before. Mm. So I think it's very company dependent, isn't it? And
yeah, absolutely. Natasha, have you just got anything just in terms of I know you've been on quite a few of the calls anyway, but is there anything you just observe on your part of the market over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting a really mixed bag. I think with regards to, I've got clients that they need new heads, and what's actually happening is they are having to utilise people from other areas of their business. So they're getting sort of customer service sent to them, they're getting administrators sent to them, so they're having to do a training piece. I've got other clients where they've actually furloughed a lot of their permanent staff, but they've kept my temporary workers on because they absolutely have to keep their cash flowing. From a candidate point of view, time and time again, it's so about the emotive piece, and people are worried about how they're going back to the office if their current employer is not going to be looking at offering them flexibility moving forward with work-life balance. They will absolutely come onto the market. And for me, I think if I had a team at the moment, I would be looking at how I'm going to keep the good people in my business by making sure that I'm, making sure they're happy with their working arrangements, that I'm offering them their work-life balance. Because if companies turn around and say, you're all back in the office, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, you're going to lose people.
Yeah. Do you think that there's going to be a change in terms of, because people are working remotely, that there's going to be more emphasis on the people that actually physically do the job, the people that are, the credit controllers, and there's a less requirement for managers, or do you think that's vice versa?
Oh,
good one.
It is a good one. I think that's really difficult, and I think how management structure and support in any profession, recruitment, credit, is going to change, and that's the piece of, I was on a call this morning where we were talking about, do we now need to do a change methodology piece with people to understand that what's going to happen. And I suppose an example in my business would be, because we're working remotely, we are being quite agile and changing some management lines. We've changed some already. We've made different decisions on our sort of business lines and how we kind of face the market. And because someone that was sat in Doncaster, not managing someone in Sheffield, but was the best person to do it, but they weren't sat in the same office, is now managing that person because it's all being done remotely. So
yeah.
I think
yeah, I mean, to that point, I think if you're a credit manager and you're in that sort of situation, my personal view would be you need to get yourself tooled up with everything that you can to make yourself better at doing it like this. If you can manage remotely, engage with your teams, motivate your staff, work well on something like Zoom, be able to work with your stakeholders to present and do it professionally, recruit the right, and demonstrate that you are working well in this environment, I think that you will do well. I think that the managers that can't, don't, or won't will be the ones that will be moving on because they don't fit with what organisations are going to look for.
Yeah, Chris, and on top of that, on top of those technical skills, the softer skills,
Exactly,
the
How do you
emotive,
engage with people that are
exactly,
not
the emotive awareness, the social awareness. When you're, managing a team remotely, the ability to spot if someone's down. I was speaking to a credit manager the other day. We had this very long conversation about when she hosts her Zoom morning meeting, she's got 6 people on a screen, and then there's 2 people every single morning throughout the week that doesn't engage. From that, she's got to realize, okay, these 2 people, maybe they aren't happy, or is there something wrong? So she's then got to have another conversation with these 2. So I'm sure she gets them engaged and see if their mental well-being is absolutely fine.
And it's
so
harder to do that when you're remotely and you're looking at little thumbnail pictures. It's much more difficult.
Yeah, so it's having that awareness, which is going to be absolutely key when we look at our new normal.
Yeah, and I think organisations, there's those organisations that used to do one-to-ones, and we always used to say one-to-ones at least monthly is what you should be doing. In this kind of situation, you've got to do them more often, right? And one of the things that I've spoken to Pam about is that what we need to do is to try and equip credit managers, the CICMQ Best Practice Network at least, with some of these skills. How are we going to help them to manage remotely more effectively? And we want to put together a pack of information for organisations to help for their team members to help managing remotely, and how do you improve your skill set in that respect. And this is something that Pam and I, we were talking about it earlier in the week, weren't we, Pam? How are we going to help credit managers achieve that? And that's something that we're very keen to do. There's another question about
Chris. Will you be setting up a social one of these whereby we can come on and do one-liner credit jokes as well as socialise for our well-being?
Yeah, we've done the Pets Corner, so I think we should do something else. One other thing, there's another question that came on. If your organisation says, right, you're going to come back to work now, and you feel very uncomfortable about that, not least because they may or may not be doing social distancing, or you feel uncomfortable, or you've got vulnerable relatives or whatever, where do you stand in terms of your rights to do that?
Right, I'd be really interested in what organisations are doing on this in terms of giving any counsel or advice on it from a legal employment law perspective. I'm not going to do that because I'm not an employment lawyer. I guess I can only reference what we're doing at Hayes, and we're very clear at Hayes that because we are able to we've enabled everyone to be able to work remotely and carry on their jobs. Because we've been able to do that it is entirely down to each individual employee's choice, that when they feel comfortable, and if they feel comfortable, when they feel safe to do so, then if our offices are open, they can come back to work. And that we've been very, very clear with that. And what we're trying to do, because ultimately we do have an aspiration that we have some return to work, of course we do, is just being starting to be very clear on our communications around the 16-page risk assessment that's being pulled together on how we would reopen an office, the fact that all employees will be able to see that, just the kind of rigour that we're putting into safety and well-being, and people feeling comfortable. So I think that's my answer for the moment on it.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. I just want to quickly finish off on the slides. There's some links and things in here
Yeah.
Which what I'll do is, if somebody wants a copy of this deck, please let me know. I might actually get it posted onto the CICM website articles page, then put a link on that, and you can go to this and also run through this. The presentation will also be on the YouTube page in a couple of days' time as well. So there's quite a few links and things on here which I will include as well. And if you want and this pack, please email cicmq@cicm.com, and we'll provide you with the deck. I'm just going to thank everybody now, and I'm just going to stop sharing. We can carry on, or stop recording, and we can then we can carry on discussing afterwards. So thanks very much, Karen. Once again, acknowledge that. I'm going to stop recording now, so that we've got 1 hour of recording, so that's probably bad enough. Okay, so thanks everybody. I'm just going to stop recording now.